The lock clicked like a verdict. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. I stood in a line with 11 other men while the door behind us got sealed, and the man holding the key didn't even bother to look proud. He looked bored. That's what made it worse. When someone can cage you without emotion, it means they've done it before and they'll do it again. "Step forward," the trader said, pointing like I was a crate that came in late. I didn't move fast. Moving fast told them you were afraid. Moving slow told them you were thinking. I gave them thinking. They'd kept us in a converted warehouse on the edge of Charleston, 200 bodies stacked into waiting, weeks for some, months for others. Time didn't pass in there. It pooled. And every morning it rose up again, sour and heavy like sweat that never dries. Food came in measured amounts, not kindness, maintenance. Enough to keep your eyes open, not enough to keep your shoulders square. They walked through every few days, those men with clean cuffs and dirty intentions, checking teeth, pinching muscle, looking for sickness like it was a discount, looking for anger like it was a defect. I learned early, don't give them a reason to mark you, but you can't hide what you are forever. Not from people who make a living turning humans into numbers. I was 18, old enough to know what chains mean, old enough to understand exactly how much a man can be worth, and how quickly that price can turn into a sentence. I watched families get separated like somebody shuffling a deck. One card to Mississippi, one to Louisiana, one to nowhere anybody could follow. After a while, you stop hoping you'll be spared. You start calculating which pain is coming next. Then one afternoon, the trader called my name like he was reading a menu. "Stand up. Somebody wants a look." I rose, and the air felt colder near the doorway. That's where the money stood. A white man in a fitted coat leaned in close, not like he cared, like he was inspecting an investment. He checked my teeth, pressed his thumb into my shoulder, pulled my arm straight like he was measuring lumber. He stared into my eyes too long. "He's got that look," the man murmured. The trader smiled thin. "It fades." What? The man grunted like he'd heard that lie before. "Not for everyone." He walked away, uninterested, and I thought I'd dodged something. Then the trader leaned closer, voice low enough to be a secret meant for my skin, not my ears. "Too clean," he said. "Too sharp. You ain't going to the fields." I didn't understand what that meant until the auction day came. They marched us out under a sun that didn't care who it burned. The platform was wood, but it felt like stone. The crowd wasn't loud at first. They were hungry, quiet hunger, the kind that counts money in its head while it looks at your body. The auctioneer was red-faced, quick-tongued, and old enough to sound like he'd been selling souls since before he had his own. "Next," he announced, tapping his papers. "Male, 18, tall. Literate, house-trained." House-trained like I was a dog. Men stepped closer. One grabbed my arm and squeezed hard, trying to see if I'd flinch. Another walked around me slow, like he was judging a horse's gait. I kept my eyes forward. I chose something far away and stared through it. That's when I noticed her. Front row, black dress in August heat. No husband beside her. Just a parasol tilted just enough to hide the top half of her face, but not her eyes. Pale blue, cold, calm. The kind of eyes that never beg. The kind that only choose. The auctioneer called a number to start. The crowd answered like wolves. 500, 6, 7. A pause hit when it got high enough to sting. Most men didn't like to lose money loudly. Then her voice cut through the heat. 8. Not shouted. Not proud, just stated, like a bill coming due. Heads turned. Women didn't bid, not like that, not alone, not in front. Someone tried to challenge her, half-hearted, like he was doing it just to be seen doing it. 9. She didn't even look at him. 10, she said, and the whole crowd went quiet like the air had been stolen. $1,000 for a man like me wasn't just a purchase, it was a message. The gavel dropped, sold, and that's when I made my first mistake. I looked back. She met my eyes and she smiled, small and controlled. Not a warm smile. The kind you give when a deal finally closes and you know the other side can't undo it. My stomach tightened. Because I understood something in that moment that the boys in the holding pen hadn't understood yet. Some cages don't look like cages at first. Some cages look like silk and manners and special treatment. And those are the ones that kill you slow. They put me on a wagon with chains that didn't clank loud. Quiet chains, polite chains. The kind meant to keep the neighbors comfortable. 15 miles outside the city, the Hartwell estate rose out of the trees like it belonged to a different world. White columns, clean gardens, a pond reflecting the sky like nothing ugly ever happened near water. But the backside told the truth. The overseer, Broussard, unlocked my wrists and didn't say my name once. He wasn't cruel in the loud way. He was efficient. That's the worst kind. Efficient means you're a routine. He led me through the kitchen past women who didn't turn their heads too fast, because looking too long at new blood can get you punished. Still, I felt their eyes on me for half a second, like a warning was being delivered without words. Then he brought me down a polished hallway into a parlor that smelled like money trying to pretend it was respectable. That's where I saw them. A line of men, 12 of them standing straight, aged roughly from 18 to mid-20s. Tall. Clean, strong, not field strong, house strong, curated. But it wasn't their bodies that made my throat close. It was their faces, blank, not calm, not proud, not angry. Blank like someone had reached inside and turned the lights off. An older black woman stepped into the room, her back bent from time and work, her eyes sharp enough to cut rope. She studied me the way a doctor studies a wound they've seen too many times. "You the new one," she said. Not a question. I nodded. "You got a name?" I gave it. She walked the line, then stopped in front of me. "Listen close," she said, voice low. "You ain't going to the fields. That's the first lie this place tells you because it'll feel like luck." She leaned in. "It's not luck." A man near the end of the line made a sound, half laugh, half grief, then swallowed it back down like it could get him killed. The woman's eyes flashed. "Rule 1, she continued. "When the mistress sends for you, you go, quick." My mouth went dry. "Rule 2. What happens behind her doors stays behind her doors. Words can get you buried." I looked along the line again. One of the men stared at the floor so hard it looked like he was trying to disappear into it. "Rule 3, she said, softer now, like she was ashamed to say it out loud. "You act grateful. You smile, because if you don't, you'll learn what worse means." "What's worse?" I asked before I could stop myself. Her eyes held mine a long moment. The kind of worse where they don't bother bringing you back. She turned her head toward the doorway. "Take him to get cleaned. Dress him proper." Then, like she was reading my future off a schedule carved into the walls, she added, "She's going to want to see him tonight." Tonight, that word hit like a hand around my throat. As they led me away, one of the men in the line, scar on his cheek, eyes older than his face, caught my gaze for half a second. In that look I saw everything he couldn't say. This place doesn't break you with whips first. It breaks you with options that aren't options. They washed me like they were preparing merchandise. Hot water, real soap, clean clothes that fit, shoes soft enough to make you forget you were owned until you remembered why you were being made presentable. I saw my reflection and didn't recognize the man staring back. He looked valuable. And in places like this, valuable doesn't mean protected. It means targeted. They brought me up a grand staircase lined with stern portraits, men who looked like they'd never apologized for anything in their lives. At the end of the hall stood a heavy door, 2 knocks, a pause, then her voice calm as a knife sliding out of a sheath. "Enter." The door opened. I stepped forward, and behind me the door closed with a soft, clean click. Not loud enough to wake the house, but loud enough to tell my instincts there would be no running if I needed to. And when I looked up, she was standing there like she'd been waiting a long time for this exact moment, with a ledger on the desk and my future already written in ink. The kind of ink you can't wash off. And she smiled again, just a little. Like the trap had finally sprung. She didn't invite me to sit. That was the first move. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits to see who asks permission. The room was big enough to echo, furnished like restraint dressed up as comfort. Heavy curtains, a wide desk, ledgers stacked neat like the past had been flattened and filed. Oil lamps burned low, steady like they knew better than to flicker in this house. Mrs. Hartwell stood near the window, backlit, hands folded behind her. She didn't turn right away. You know why I paid what I paid, she said. Not a question. A statement designed to see if I'd argue. I stayed quiet. Silence makes people uncomfortable when they're used to being obeyed. She turned then, eyes calm, measuring, the same look she'd given me on the auction block. But now there was something else in it. Ownership. You're not like the rest, she said. You notice things, you listen. Her eyes drifted to the ledgers. Men like you are wasted in the fields. I felt the trap close a little tighter. She finally gestured toward a chair. I sat, slow, controlled. Every move mattered here. I'd learned that watching overseers who lived longer than the loud ones. I run a disciplined house, she continued. No chaos, no surprises, everything here has a purpose. She opened a ledger and slid it toward me. Columns, names, dates, numbers, human lives reduced to math. You can read, she said, again not asking. Yes, ma'am. Her lips curved. Good, then you'll understand this. She tapped the page. Most plantations bleed money, disease, laziness, rebellion. I don't tolerate inefficiency. She flipped a page. House staff costs more up front, she went on, but with the right management, they generate returns. Returns, I didn't like the way that word sat between us. You and the others upstairs, she said, finally meeting my eyes. You're not servants in the traditional sense, you're assets, carefully selected, maintained, tracked. She closed the book, and assets don't get wasted. That was when I understood something important. This wasn't cruelty fueled by impulse. This was strategy, cold, organized, patient. I expect obedience, she said, not because I enjoy punishment, but because disorder is expensive. She stood, circled the desk, stopped just far enough away to remind me distance was a choice she controlled. You'll live in the house. You'll eat well. You'll be kept healthy. In return, you'll do exactly what you're told, exactly when you're told. A pause. Refusal, she added softly, creates consequences I don't enjoy paying for. I thought of the men in the line, the emptiness behind their eyes, the way none of them spoke unless spoken to. Yes, ma'am, I said. She studied me another second, then nodded, satisfied. Good, you'll learn quickly. She waved a hand toward the door like I'd already been dismissed in her mind. As I turned to leave, her voice stopped me. One more thing, she said. This arrangement works because everyone plays their role. If you disrupt that balance, I will correct it. I stepped back into the hallway, heart steady, mind racing. Correction meant pain, but worse than pain was replacement. Assets that stopped performing got sold, or sent somewhere people didn't come back from. Upstairs, the man with the scar, Daniel, I'd learned later, was waiting by the stair rail. You still breathing? He asked quietly. For now. He nodded once, then you're in. Days passed, then weeks. Routine settled in like a second skin. Breakfast together, quiet, no questions, no talk of before. Work that kept us visible but not central, polishing, carrying, standing still when standing still was required. At night, doors opened, doors closed, footsteps moved in patterns you learned not to count. No one explained everything at once. That was another strategy. Break understanding into pieces small enough to swallow. Daniel spoke to me when he could. Don't stand out, he said once, barely moving his lips. Don't disappear either. Middle ground keeps you alive. Is there a way out? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Not alone, he finally said. I watched the others more closely after that. Samuel, the favorite, always calm, always anticipating. He survived by becoming exactly what was expected before it was asked. Marcus, built heavy, used to keep order. The overseers trusted him because fear followed his shadow. Isaiah, the oldest, quiet, observant. He'd learned every rule and every exception. He was still alive because he knew when not to speak. And then there were the broken ones, men who stared too long, men who moved like their minds were somewhere else. They were warnings. One night a new man arrived, Marcus Jr., 20 years old, strong, eyes still sharp, too sharp. Mama Ruth gave him the same talk she'd given me. He listened. Then he shook his head. No, he said. The word fell heavy in the room. Daniel closed his eyes like he'd just heard a death sentence being read. I won't do it. Marcus Jr. said again, louder now. I won't be owned like this. Mama Ruth didn't argue, she just sighed. That night they dragged him. We heard the struggle through the walls, the furniture, the orders, the sounds a man makes when his body learns how little it matters. In the morning his room was empty. 3 days later he came back, alive. But whatever fire he'd carried into that house didn't survive the correction. At breakfast he sat down, lifted his spoon, and ate like the rest of us. Didn't speak, didn't look up. And that's when I knew something else. This place didn't just punish rebellion, it studied it, learned from it, improved its methods. And somewhere in that big house, behind those ledgers and calm smiles, Mrs. Hartwell was already adjusting her strategy, which meant the board was shifting. And when the board shifts, someone always gets sacrificed. Power doesn't panic. That's the rule I learned watching Mrs. Hartwell. When Marcus Jr. broke, she didn't rush. She didn't rant. She adjusted. Schedules shifted. Oversight tightened. Doors got checked twice. Smiles became rarer. That's how you knew pressure was building. Quiet pressure is the kind that kills. Weeks rolled into months. The house learned our rhythms and we learned its moods. Every creak in the floorboards meant something. Every delay in a summons was a message. We started reading silence the way gamblers read cards. Then one morning the pattern cracked. A rider arrived early, too early, dust on his coat. No luggage, that meant inspection, not visiting. I was polishing silver in the dining room when I saw Mrs. Hartwell freeze mid-step, just for a breath, enough. She took the envelope from the servant, broke the seal, read once. Then again, her jaw tightened. William, she said under her breath. That name moved through the house faster than gossip. William Hartwell wasn't just family, he was money with eyes. The kind of man who didn't inherit wealth by trusting stories. He trusted numbers, paper, balance, audits. That afternoon, nothing exploded, but everything changed. We were summoned at odd hours, dismissed without explanation, used hard, then ignored. Like she was draining every ounce of value before someone else started counting. Daniel caught my eye on the stairwell. Something's coming, he whispered. I know. A week later, William arrived. Mid-50s, straight-backed, clean boots. Eyes like they'd already decided what you were worth before you opened your mouth. He walked the plantation the way a butcher walks a market. Fields, stables, quarters, no emotion, just measurement. Then he went to the books. That night we stood in the parlor again. Same line, same formation, different stakes. William walked slowly in front of us, hands clasped behind his back. What are your duties? He asked. We answered clean, safe. The way survival had trained us. You're well fed, he noted. Strong, no field scars. He stopped in front of me. You read? Yes, sir. Interesting flickered behind his eyes. Later, carrying tea past the study, I heard raised voices. Unnecessary expenses. Innovations, breeding schedules. That word landed hard, even half heard. The door slammed. Silence followed. That night the third-floor hallway felt different, like the house was holding its breath. I knocked on Marcus's door. The signal. Others followed. 12 men packed into a room built for one. No overseers, no Mama Ruth, just us. This is it, I said quietly. He's seen the books. Samuel scoffed. So what, they'll sell us, break us up. Maybe, I said, or maybe he needs this buried. Isaiah spoke then, voice calm, deadly serious. Secrets are leverage, if you know when to apply pressure. Daniel looked at me. You thinking what I think you're thinking? I nodded. We stopped, I said, all of it. Silence. We don't go down, don't work, don't answer summons. We demand to speak to William together. Marcus clenched his jaw. They'll whip us. One man, I said. Yes, 12, that's a problem, and William hates problems that bleed money. And if he kills us? Thomas asked, voice shaking. Then we die once, Isaiah said quietly, not a little every day. No one moved. Morning came. Breakfast waited untouched. Mama Ruth knocked. No answer. Boots followed. Orders, threats. We stayed still. Then a new voice, controlled, close. Open the doors, William said. I'm here. We stepped into the hall, lined up again, but this time we didn't bow. What is this? He demanded. I stepped forward. We're done, I said. With what? With being managed like inventory, with being leveraged. with pretending this is normal. Catherine shouted from below, called us liars. I didn't look at her. Check the ledgers, I said to William, every page. Minutes later, the books lay open in his hands. He read, slowly. When he closed them, the house felt smaller. This ends, he said at last, today. Relief surged, then stopped cold. But you, he continued, eyes on us, are still a problem. He laid out the options like a man ordering supplies. Fields, sale, silence. Then the fourth option, freedom, papers, passage north, money, but not everyone. Names were excluded, assets retained. I felt something tear inside my chest, slow and deep. Choose, William said. Now. I looked back at the men behind me, saw fear, hope, rage, exhaustion. I understood the board. Freedom always costs something, and the house was about to collect. I opened my mouth to answer, knowing whatever I said next would save some of us and condemn others forever. Silence stretched long enough to hurt. William Hartwell didn't rush me. Men like him never do. They know time leans their way. Pressure makes other people fold first. I tasted blood where I'd bitten my tongue without realizing it. We accept, I said. The words landed heavy. Final, not victory, not surrender, a trade. William nodded once like he'd just closed a deal that was never really in doubt. Smart, he said. Survival favors the practical. Catherine made a sound behind him, sharp, uncontrolled. Rage cracking through polish. You can't let them walk away, she said, after everything. William raised a hand. She stopped, not because she agreed, because she knew the hierarchy. The papers will be drawn, he said. You leave quietly, you don't look back, and you don't speak of this place, ever. He leaned closer, voice dropping. Freedom is fragile, treat it like glass. That night the house felt hollow, like something rotten had been cut out and the walls hadn't decided whether to collapse yet. We packed what little we were allowed. No goodbyes that could be overheard. No promises we couldn't keep. Mama Ruth found me near the stairwell just before dawn. She pressed a folded sheet into my palm. Names, she whispered. Don't let them disappear. Her eyes held mine. Living free ain't the same as living clean. Outside, the wagon waited. 12 men climbed in. 2 women followed. No chains. That detail mattered more than anything. As the wheels started turning, I looked back once. Catherine stood on the veranda, wrapped in black, watching like a woman memorizing a wound she planned to reopen someday. Our eyes met. She didn't smile this time, she promised. The road bent. The house vanished behind trees. No one spoke. Because freedom, real freedom, doesn't announce itself. It waits to see if anyone comes chasing. And as the wagon rolled toward the harbor, toward a future none of us understood, I felt it deep in my chest. This wasn't the end of the game. It was just the first move off the board. Some debts don't stay buried. And somewhere behind us, in ledgers not yet burned and memories not yet quiet, something was already counting the cost. The harbor didn't feel like freedom. It felt like exposure. Too many eyes. Too many questions hanging in the air without being asked. Ships creaked against the docks like they were whispering to each other, and every rope looked like it could turn into a noose if the wrong man decided to pull. William didn't come with us that far. Men like him never watch the consequences of their decisions. They outsource that. An overseer handed me an envelope, thin, too thin for what it was supposed to represent. Don't open it here, he said, and don't linger. That was the last order I ever took. The captain checked our papers slow, too slow. I watched his eyes more than his hands. People read documents, but they believe faces. I kept mine calm, flat, like I'd already survived worse than suspicion. Finally, he nodded. Your cargo I don't want trouble over, he muttered. You stay below deck till we clear the coast. Below deck wasn't chains, but it wasn't air either. The ship pulled away at dusk. Charleston shrinking behind us, not dramatic, not fast, just receding, like it wasn't done with us yet, just stepping back to see what we'd do next. That's when Samuel stood. I'm not coming, he said. The words hit harder than any shout. What? Daniel whispered. Samuel didn't look at any of us. He stared at the water. I don't know how to be anything else, he said. Up there, I'm nobody. In a house like that, I know the rules. You'll be owned again, Marcus said. Samuel nodded. At least I'll understand the language. Before anyone could stop him, he stepped off the gangplank and vanished into the crowd like he'd been erased. No chase, no speech, just gone. The ship pulled 3 minutes later. No one spoke his name again. Northbound nights were long, quiet, too quiet for men who'd learned to measure safety by noise. Some of us slept, some of us didn't. Marcus Jr. stared at the dark like it might blink first. One morning his bunk was empty, coat folded, boots lined up. No note. The river took him clean. We didn't stop the ship. Freedom doesn't heal everything. Sometimes it just removes the cage and leaves you alone with what broke inside it. When we finally docked, the air felt different. Colder, sharper, less forgiving. No one called us property. They just called us men and then watched us like they were deciding what that meant. Work was hard, pay was light, nights were restless, but no one summoned us. No doors locked behind us. Still, danger didn't disappear, it changed shape. Men disappeared in northern cities too. Slave catchers, debt, hunger, laws written with clean ink and dirty intent. One evening, months later, a man followed me from the docks. Careful, patient, not drunk, not desperate, professional. I turned into an alley that didn't forgive mistakes. He spoke from behind me. You left something behind in South Carolina. I stopped, didn't turn. Some people, he continued, don't like unfinished business. My hand tightened around the folded paper in my coat, the list, the names. I smiled without humor. Then they should have killed me when they had the chance. Silence, then footsteps retreating, not running, reporting. I stood there a long time after he was gone, feeling it settle in my bones. We de-escaped the house, but the game had followed us north, and I understood something then, clear as any ledger entry. Survival was never the end goal, control was, and somebody somewhere had just decided I was still on the board. After that night, I stopped walking home the same way twice. Freedom teaches you fast if you listen. The streets up north didn't crack whips, but they kept records. Names moved quietly between mouths that never smiled. Men vanished without plantations, without ledgers, without explanations. Different system, same math. I told no one about the man in the alley. Not Daniel, not Marcus, not even Sarah. Fear spreads faster than truth, and I needed their heads clear. Mine too, but I felt it, the pressure. Jobs dried up in places that used to take me without questions. A foreman who nodded yesterday suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. A landlord asked for papers twice. Then 3 times. Someone was checking. On Sundays, I kept writing. Mama Ruth's list sat on the table, growing heavier with every name I added. Hartwell, the collection, the schedules, the quiet violence dressed up as management. I wrote like a man building a weapon he didn't know how to fire yet. Sarah watched me one night, hands still, needle frozen in cloth. They don't let men like us walk away clean, she said. I know. Rose was learning fast, reading signs, counting coins, asking questions I didn't always answer. That scared me more than the man in the alley. Then Daniel didn't come home. One night passed, then another. By the 3rd morning, his tools were still by the door, his coat still hanging. I went to the docks, asked careful questions. No one had seen him, which meant someone had. That evening, a note slid under the boarding house door. No name, no signature, just a place and a time. I didn't tell the others, some moves you make alone. The warehouse was near the water, old brick, abandoned on paper. I arrived early, stood where I could see exits, counted shadows. A man stepped out, not the alley man, older, cleaner, better dressed. You're harder to erase than expected, he said. What do you want? I asked. He smiled thin. Closure. He stepped closer. The Hartwells burned their books, but fire doesn't reach memory, and memory makes noise. My chest tightened. Daniel. The man didn't answer, which was answer enough. You walk away now, he said. Leave the past where it belongs, and you get to keep the future you've been borrowing. And if I don't? He leaned in, voice soft. Then freedom is going to start costing you people. He turned, already done with me. I stood there, heart steady, rage cold and precise, because now the board was clear. Running wouldn't save us. Silence wouldn't save us. And the men who thought we were still property had just made the oldest mistake in the game. They reminded me, I still had something they wanted buried. And once someone tries to bury you, you don't negotiate, you dig first. I went home knowing one thing for certain. The next move wouldn't be defensive, and somebody was about to learn that a man who survives cages learns how to build them too. I didn't sleep that night, not because of fear. Fear is loud, it shakes you. This was quieter than that. This was focus settling in, the kind that comes when you finally stop asking if trouble is coming and start asking where it will hit first. By morning, I knew. The Hartwells weren't hunting us to punish us. They were hunting us to erase proof. Daniel was proof. So was the paper under my mattress. So were the stories we carried in our heads, the ones that didn't burn clean. I went to the docks before sunrise and spoke to a man who didn't ask questions because he charged by the hour, not by the conscience. He told me something that confirmed what my bones already knew. There were names moving again. Southern money, quiet inquiries, men paid to listen, not act. Yet that meant the window was small. I gathered the others that night. Marcus, Isaiah, Thomas. Sarah stayed back with Rose. She'd earned enough danger already. They're cleaning house, I told them. North and south. Marcus swore under his breath. So what's the play? I laid the paper on the table. Mama Ruth's list, my notes, names, dates, places. This, I said, stops being memory, starts being leverage. Isaiah frowned. You talking about selling it? No, I said. I'm talking about placing it. The room went still. Churches, I continued. Printers. Men who hate the Hartwells more than they fear them. You put this in enough hands, nobody can make it disappear without making it louder. And Daniel, Thomas asked, that name hung between us. If he's alive, I said carefully, this makes him safer. If he's not, this makes him matter. We split the papers, copies, redundancy, survival thinking. That's when the knock came, not loud, not angry, precise. Marcus moved first, hand on the doorframe, eyes asking me if we were done running. Another knock, same rhythm. I know you're in there, a voice said, familiar, the alley man. I stepped forward before Marcus could. Open it, I said. The door swung wide. He stood there alone, no weapon visible. That meant there were others close enough not to need one. You've been busy, he said, glancing past me at the table. Too late, I replied. His smile faded just enough. That depends, he said, on how much you care about the people behind you. That's when I heard it, boots. Not upstairs, not outside, down the hall, multiple, closing. And in that moment, with exits shrinking and choices collapsing, I understood something Bumpy Johnson would have understood without blinking. When power finally shows its hand, it's never to negotiate. It's to end the game. And the only question left was whether we were about to be silenced. Or whether this was the moment the whole board flipped over. I didn't move. I didn't speak. Because the next sound would tell me everything. And it was coming. The boot stopped outside the door. That pause mattered. It told me whoever was running this didn't want noise. Noise draws witnesses. Witnesses make stories. And stories are what they were trying to kill. The man in the doorway tilted his head, listening like a broker waiting on a price to settle. Last chance, he said. Hand over the papers. Walk away breathing. Behind me, I felt Marcus shift his weight. Isaiah's breath slowed. Thomas's hands were shaking, but he stayed where he was. No one ran, that was important. Fear breaks faster when it smells movement. I stepped closer to the man until I could see the small scar near his jaw. Old, clean, professional. You already lost, I said quietly. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Men in your position don't get to decide that. I leaned in, just enough for him to hear me over the blood in his own ears. These papers aren't here anymore. That did it. The smile vanished. The door behind him opened, not kicked. Opened. 2 men stepped in, plain clothes, northern accents trained to sound local. One of them scanned the room and froze when he saw the table was empty. Too late, the alley man cursed under his breath. I felt something strange then, not fear, relief. Because when the threat finally steps into the light, it stops being imagined. It becomes measurable, beatable. You don't understand, the second man said. This isn't personal. That's what makes it dangerous, I replied. Marcus moved, fast, not wild, purposeful. He slammed the door shut and drove his shoulder into it, locking us in with them. People always expect victims to run. They don't plan for them to close distance. The room exploded, chairs broke. Someone hit the floor hard enough to knock the breath out of the night. I caught a glimpse of a blade, then blood where blood shouldn't be. It didn't last long. Fights like this never do. When it was over, one man wasn't moving. Another was holding his ribs like he was reconsidering every decision that led him here. The alley man backed toward the wall, eyes wide now. "You just made this worse," he said. "No," I answered. "We made it public." Sirens wailed in the distance. Not close. Not yet, but close enough to change priorities. The man bolted when the first shout echoed from the street. His injured partner followed, limping, leaving a thin red trail like a signature. We stood there in the wreckage, breathing hard, listening to the sound grow louder. Isaiah laughed once, sharp and almost hysterical. "Guess that answers the question." "What question?" Thomas asked. "Whether we were still on the board," Isaiah said. I looked at the broken door, the blood on the floor, the empty table where the papers had been. "We just tipped it," I said. "And somewhere out there, maybe in a townhouse, maybe in an office with clean walls and dirty money, someone was realizing the same thing, that the men they thought were erased had started writing back. The sirens were closer now, and depending on who arrived first, this would either become protection or the beginning of a whole new kind of hunt." I didn't move. I waited. Because the next knock wouldn't sound like a threat. It would sound like authority. And authority always wants something in return. The knock came heavy, not rushed, not curious, official. I raised a hand and everyone froze, breathing slowed, movement stopped. That was the discipline the house had taught us, twisted now into something useful. "Open up," a voice said, firm. Northern, used to being obeyed. I opened the door halfway. Two men stood there, one in a city coat, one in uniform. The kind of uniform that didn't smile and didn't explain itself unless it had to. Their eyes went straight past me. Broken chair, blood on the floor, too clean to be an accident. "We had reports of a disturbance," the uniform said. "Men tried to rob us," I replied, calm, precise. No extra words. The city man studied me longer than necessary. He wasn't counting bruises, he was counting stories. "You want to tell me why 3 men ran out of here bleeding?" he asked. "Because they underestimated who they were dealing with," I said. A corner of his mouth twitched. Not approval, recognition. They stepped inside, asked questions, took names, not all of them, just enough to say they did their job. That told me something else. They already knew more than they were letting on. When they finally left, the room felt smaller than before. "They'll be back," Marcus said. "Yes," I agreed. "But not like this." That night I moved the last copies. Churches. A printer who owed Isaiah a favor. A man with ink-stained hands who understood exactly how dangerous paper could be. By morning, whispers had started. Not loud, not public, but names were moving. Hartwell, Charleston, a widow who lived too clean, an estate that shut its doors too tightly. By the third day, a man in a respectable hat followed me from the docks. Didn't hide it, didn't rush. "You're James," he said. "That depends," I answered. He handed me a card, no address, just a name and a symbol. "We represent interests that don't like bullies who think money makes them invisible," he said. "You've caused a ripple." "Good," I said. He leaned closer. "Ripples attract sharks." "So do secrets," I replied. He smiled thin. "Careful, you're standing between two kinds of power now." He walked away. That night, Sarah asked me the question she'd been holding since Charleston. "Does this ever end?" I looked at Rose, asleep on the floor with a book open on her chest. "Free for now." "No," I said honestly, "but it changes." Outside, somewhere across the city, a window shattered. Then another. Not here, not yet. I understood then. The Hartwells weren't done. They'd lost control of the story. And men like that don't forgive losses. They collect, slowly, quietly. And the next move wouldn't come from the shadows. It would come from someone powerful enough to smile while they did it. Power didn't come at us loud. It came dressed respectable. A week after the whispers started, a carriage rolled down our street, slow, deliberate. Clean wheels, fresh paint. The kind of arrival meant to be noticed without asking permission. Everyone felt it. Conversations died mid-sentence. Windows closed. Fear has a way of teaching neighborhoods when to mind their business. The man who stepped down wasn't armed, didn't need to be, gray hair, tailored coat, hands soft enough to tell you he never lifted anything heavier than a pen. "I'm looking for James," he said. He said my name like it was already written somewhere official. I stepped forward before anyone else could. "That depends who's asking." He smiled, polite, surgical. Someone authorized to end this or prolong it. He followed me inside without waiting to be invited. Looked around, not curious, cataloging. "You've embarrassed influential people," he said calmly, "people who don't lose gracefully." "They started it." "They always say that," he replied. "The difference is who survives the ending." He sat crossed his legs, perfectly at ease. "The Hartwell matter is being handled," he continued, quietly, "which means your usefulness is expiring." I felt Marcus tense behind me. "What do you want?" I asked. "A choice," the man said. "You and the others disappear into normal lives, work, silence, forgetting." "And the papers?" "Burned," he said, "along with the story." I shook my head. "Not happening." He sighed, disappointed. "Then understand this." He leaned in just enough for me to smell expensive tobacco. "This city isn't a refuge, it's a marketplace, and you've become a commodity again, just a dangerous one." He stood, smoothing his coat. "You won one round," he said. "That happens sometimes, but the board belongs to people who never sit at the table." He walked to the door, paused. "Oh," he added, almost kindly, "by the way, Daniel was alive when he left Charleston." The words hit harder than any blow. "Where is he?" I demanded. The man opened the door. "Still useful," he said, "for now." Then he was gone. I stood there long after the sound of wheels faded. They hadn't killed us, not yet. They were repositioning, using hope as leverage, and that told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about covering up the past anymore. This was about control of the future. I turned back to the room, to Marcus, to Isaiah, to Sarah holding Rose like the world might try to take her again. "They think they still own the game," I said quietly. "And?" Marcus asked. I folded Mama Ruth's list once more, careful, respectful. "Then it's time we stop playing defense," I said, "and start deciding who gets to walk away." Outside, somewhere close enough to matter, another carriage rolled to a stop. This time it didn't slow down, and whoever stepped out next wasn't here to negotiate. The second carriage didn't knock, it waited. That's how I knew it wasn't law and it wasn't business as usual. When power waits, it's deciding whether you're worth the effort. I didn't rush to the window. Rushing shows nerves. I poured water instead, slow, steady. Let the silence stretch until whoever was outside felt it too. Then a single footstep, heavy, confident. A man came through the front door like he owned the street. Broad shoulders, dark coat. No ornament, no softness. His eyes swept the room once and locked on me like they'd already read my file. "James," he said. Not asking. Behind him stood two others, not guards, witnesses. The kind brought along so no one could later say things happened by accident. "I represent interests that don't speak twice," the man continued. "You've caused friction." "Friction leads to heat," I replied. "Heat exposes things." A corner of his mouth twitched. Not amusement, calculation. "You think you're protected," he said, "because you made noise, because you scattered paper, because you touched names men prefer stay clean." He stepped closer, close enough that Marcus shifted, ready. "But noise fades," the man said quietly, "and paper burns." I met his eyes, didn't blink. "People remember," I said, "especially when they're reminded." He studied me like a man, deciding whether to break a tool or repurpose it. "You're smart," he said finally. "That's the problem. Smart men create uncertainty." He turned his head slightly, just enough for me to catch it. Daniel, alive, bruised, thinner, standing across the street, held just out of sight like a bargaining chip. My chest tightened, but my face didn't move. "You let him go," I said. The man smiled. This time it reached his eyes. "Not yet," he said. "This is the part where you choose." He leaned in, voice low, lethal. You disappear, you take your people west, you stop writing, stop talking, stop remembering out loud, and Daniel walks away breathing. And if I don't? His voice dropped to a whisper. Then the next time you see him, it'll be in pieces, and you'll know exactly why. The room held its breath. I thought of the auction block. The ledgers, Mama Ruth's hands, Sarah's children left behind, every man who'd been erased quietly because silence was cheaper than justice. I nodded once. Give me proof he's alive, I said. The man snapped his fingers. Daniel lifted his head. Our eyes met. That was all I needed. Tomorrow night, the man said. Same place. Bring nothing. No papers, no friends. He straightened, already finished. Think carefully, he added. History doesn't favor men who confuse courage with stubbornness. They left as clean as they arrived. I stood there long after the door closed. Marcus spoke first. You can't go alone. I have to, I said. Isaiah shook his head. That's a setup. Yes, I agreed, which means they expect me to react. I looked down at the list, at the names, at the weight of all of it. They think I'm choosing between one man and the truth, I said quietly. I folded the paper and slid it into my coat. They don't realize, I continued, eyes hard now, that the truth has already been spent. Outside, the night settled in thick and patient. Tomorrow, someone was going to find out what happens when you threaten a man who's already survived everything you can take from him. And only one of us was walking away clean. Night came early. Not because the sun rushed, but because my mind stopped waiting for it. I didn't tell Sarah where I was going. I kissed Rose's forehead, lingered half a second longer than necessary, and let that be the goodbye I hoped I wouldn't need. Marcus watched from the doorway, jaw tight. If this goes wrong, he started. It already has, I said. I'm just choosing where it ends. The meeting place was a closed rail yard by the river. Iron tracks cutting through darkness like scars that never healed. One lamp burned in the distance. That was deliberate, enough light to be seen, not enough to see everything. They were already there. The same man, same calm, same certainty that he controlled the terms. Daniel was seated on a crate, hands tied, a bruise blooming along his cheekbone. Still alive, still himself, that mattered. You came alone, the man said. Yes. No papers. I opened my coat, empty hands, honest in the way liars have to be when the lie would cost too much. He nodded, satisfied. You understand what happens next, he said. You walk away, you forget, he walks. And you keep the rest buried, I replied. That's the arrangement. I stepped forward slowly, eyes never leaving Daniel. You know what your mistake is? I asked. The man raised an eyebrow. Enlighten me. You think this ends with me, I said, like I'm the source. I stopped just short of arm's reach. I'm not. His smile thinned, too late for speeches. That's when the sound reached us. Not loud, close, footsteps more than two, moving with purpose. The man's head snapped slightly to the side, listening, calculating. I smiled for the first time that night. You waited too long, I said. From the shadows, figures emerged, not Marcus, not Isaiah, strangers, men in plain coats, church men, printers, dock workers. A city official I'd never met but whose eyes told me he'd read enough. Witnesses. The man swore under his breath. What is this? He demanded. This, I said, is what happens when a story spreads faster than money. Daniel looked up, confusion giving way to understanding. You leaked it, he said hoarsely. Placed it, I corrected. The official stepped forward. We've been following this trail for weeks, he said. South Carolina, Philadelphia, names keep repeating, Hartwell among them. The man backed up a step, just one, but it broke the illusion. You don't have jurisdiction. We have public interest, the official replied, and enough testimony to make your night very uncomfortable. The man looked at me then, really looked. You set me up, he said. No, I answered. You set yourself up when you thought silence was stronger than truth. Hands grabbed Daniel's ropes, cut them. Sirens sounded again, this time closer, this time intentional. The man turned, calculating exits, but the yard had filled in quiet ways. Doors closed, paths narrowed. He leaned toward me one last time. "This won't end how you think," he said. I met his stare, calm, steady, finished running. "It already did," I replied. "You just didn't hear it yet." They took him away, not gently, not violently, officially. Daniel stood beside me, swaying, alive. For the first time since Charleston, the board wasn't tilted against us. But I knew better than to call it peace. Because power doesn't die when it's exposed, it adapts. And somewhere out there, someone was already studying what went wrong and how to fix it. I put a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "We're not done," I said quietly. He nodded. Neither of us smiled, because survival was never the victory. What came next would decide whether any of this meant something at all. They let him go. That was the first surprise. No cell, no chains, just paperwork, signatures, and a door that opened the right way for once. Daniel walked out into the cold air, blinking like a man relearning distance. That's how I knew this wasn't over. Real justice doesn't hurry. It builds files. It buries things under words like investigation and pending. And men with real reach know how to survive paperwork better than prison. The official shook my hand before leaving. Firm. Careful. "You did the right thing," he said. I didn't answer. Right things don't usually leave this many loose ends. Daniel stayed with us that night, ate slow, slept lighter than anyone. Every noise made his shoulders tight. Freedom doesn't erase conditioning, it just removes the walls. By morning, rumors were already shifting. Hartwell money was moving, properties changing hands, names disappearing from directories like they'd never existed. Catherine's townhouse was closed, curtains drawn. Quiet as a grave with good locks, and that scared me more than anger would have. Marcus found me on the steps just after dawn. "Men like that don't forgive," he said. "No," I agreed. "They reorganize." 3 days later, the printer was gone, shop closed, windows boarded, no note. Then the church man stopped coming to meetings. Then a dock worker who'd sworn he'd testify took a job upriver and didn't leave a forwarding address. No bodies, just absences. I understood the message. We heard you. Now watch what happens when attention fades. That night I sat alone with Mama Ruth's list spread out on the table. Names of people who never got to choose how their story ended. Names that survived only because someone refused to forget them. I added new ones in the margin. Careful. Small handwriting, not dead, missing. Sarah came in quietly, wrapped in a shawl. "You're not done," she said. "No." "Then neither are they." She was right. The game had shifted again, from exposure to erasure. And erasure is cleaner, harder to fight. No noise, no headlines. Just people slowly removed until you're standing alone, wondering when you became the last witness. I folded the paper and slid it into a false bottom I'd built under the floorboards weeks earlier. Then I made a decision I'd been avoiding. I wouldn't wait for the next move. I would force it. Because men who erase others count on patience, on fatigue, on the world moving on. And I had learned something from every cage I'd ever survived. The most dangerous man in the room isn't the loud one. It's the one who decides to stop reacting and starts planning. Somewhere across the city, a door was about to open, and whoever walked through it next wasn't expecting me to already be there. I didn't go looking for revenge. Revenge is loud, predictable, easy to spot from a distance. I went looking for patterns. Men like the Hartwells didn't vanish. They rerouted, different addresses, different intermediaries, same gravity pulling money and favors into their orbit. I followed that gravity the way old hustlers follow dice, never staring straight at it, always watching what moves around it. The door I was waiting on belonged to a counting office near the river, legitimate on paper, grain contracts, shipping insurance, the kind of place that smells like ink and respectability. I'd walked past it a dozen times before, learning its habits. Same clerk every morning, same guard at dusk, same back door that stayed unlocked 10 minutes longer than it should. People call that a mistake. It's not. It's confidence. I went in after dark, not breaking anything. Breaking things leaves questions. I left them exactly as they were except for one desk drawer. Inside were letters, not signed, not stupid, but familiar in their caution. Instructions written like suggestions. Payments disguised as favors. Names that had no business appearing together unless something ugly connected them. Hartwell money. Still alive, still working. I copied nothing, took nothing. I just memorized. That's the part nobody plans for anymore. When I stepped back outside, the street was empty in the way that isn't empty at all. Too quiet, too still. My reflection in a shop window didn't move when I did. I kept walking. Then I heard it. My name, soft, certain. I stopped. A man leaned out from the shadow between two buildings. Not one I recognized. Younger, clean face. Nervous eyes pretending not to be. "You're hard to pin down," he said. "Then you shouldn't try," I replied. He swallowed. "You don't understand who you're dealing with." I turned slowly, finally facing him. "I understand exactly," I said. "That's why you're here instead of them." His jaw tightened. He hadn't expected that. "They know what you're doing," he warned, "and they're done letting you choose the pace." I stepped closer until he had to look up at me. "Tell them this," I said quietly. "I'm not chasing them anymore." He frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," I continued, "the next move isn't going to come from the shadows." I leaned in just enough for the truth to hurt. "It's going to come in daylight. With names attached." His face drained of color. He backed away without another word, disappearing into the same darkness he'd borrowed confidence from. I stood there a moment longer, letting the night settle. Because once you threaten men who live by secrets with exposure, you don't get warnings anymore. You get deadlines. And somewhere, right then, someone powerful was deciding whether it was cheaper to silence me or to burn everything around me instead. Either way, I just forced their hand, and hands that move in panic make mistakes. Daylight changed the rules. At night, men imagine they're invisible. In the day, they start worrying about who's watching. I walked straight into it. No hiding, no detours. I let myself be seen at the docks, at the church steps, outside the print shop that used to be open. Visibility was the point. When you're hunted, sometimes the safest place is the middle of the street. By noon, the reaction came. Not bullets, not fists, paper. A notice posted quiet on a public board, small print, legal language sharp enough to cut if you knew how to read it. Inquiry, subpoenas, testimony requested. Not about me. About Hartwell-adjacent accounts, shipping irregularities, charitable funds that never reached their destination. That told me I'd hit the right nerve. Men who rule from the shadows don't fear noise. They fear light they can't control. Daniel found me an hour later, breathless. "They're moving money again," he said. "Fast." "Good," I replied. "Fast means sloppy." That afternoon, I received the invitation I'd been waiting for. No threats, no intermediaries, just an address, a time, and a single sentence, written clean and confident. "We should speak like civilized men. Civilized men don't invite you unless they're losing options." The building was downtown, respectable, marble steps, brass handles polished by 100 hands that never worked for a living. I arrived on time, on purpose. The man waiting inside was Catherine, wasn't William. It was someone higher, older, calmer. The kind of man who'd never raised his voice because he'd never needed to. "You've caused unnecessary disruption," he said, pouring 2 glasses without asking if I wanted one. "Disruption is what happens when rot gets air," I answered. He smiled faintly. "You think you're exposing something. You're not. You're inconveniencing it." I sat without being told. "Then let's stop pretending," I said. "You want this quiet, I want it finished." His eyes sharpened, interest replacing dismissal. "And what does finished look like to you?" I leaned forward, voice steady. "Names on record, operations shut down, no more disappearing witnesses, no more quiet men cleaning messes." He laughed softly. "Idealism," he said, "it doesn't survive negotiations." "Neither does denial," I replied. "Not anymore." Silence stretched. He studied me the way men do when they're deciding whether to crush something or absorb it. Finally, he spoke. "You're dangerous," he said. "Not because you're violent, because you understand leverage." "I learned it early," I said, "from people who thought they owned me." He set his glass down untouched. "Here's what will happen," he said. "Some names will surface. Not all. Some operations will close, not all. and you will stop. And if I don't, he met my gaze, calm returning, then you become the lesson. I stood, then choose carefully, I said, because lessons get studied. I turned and walked out before he could respond. Outside, the city moved like nothing had happened. Carts rolling, people laughing, life continuing, ignorant of how close it lived to collapse. Behind me, power was recalculating. Ahead of me, consequences were lining up. And somewhere between the two, I understood the truth Bumpy Johnson would have smiled at. When you force the game into the open, you don't get to control how hard the pieces fall. You only get to decide whether you're still standing when they do. And I was. The fallout didn't come all at once. That's another thing men with money understand. Collapse is inefficient. You let things crack in stages. Controlled damage, enough sacrifice to calm the crowd, not enough to threaten the structure. 2 weeks passed. Then the first headline hit, small paper, back page. Easy to miss unless you were looking for it. Estate trust under review. No names, no drama, but I recognized the language. That was a warning shot. 3 days later, a clerk from the counting office vanished. Not dead, reassigned. The word they use when someone knows too much and asks too few questions. By the end of the month, a Hartwell shipping partner retired suddenly. Health reasons, always health reasons. Daniel brought me the news each time, eyes wide. It's working, he said. No, I corrected him. It's balancing. Balancing means someone else is about to pay. That night, Sarah didn't wait for me to speak. They're going to come for you, she said, not afraid, certain. Yes. When? When this stops being cheaper than stopping me. She nodded once. That was all she needed. I moved Rose the next morning, quietly, across town, different school, different name on the register. You don't win these games by being brave. You win by being careful. That afternoon, I found the mark. A man named Keller, middle tier, thought he was invisible because he wasn't important enough to matter. Those are the ones who crack first. I didn't threaten him. I didn't even accuse him. I let him talk. People always do when they think you're already dead. By the time he realized what he'd said, his hands were shaking. Why me? He asked. Because you're not protected, I replied. You're just tolerated. That night Keller ran. That was a mistake. Men who run draw attention. Attention pulls threads, threads unravel suits. By morning his name was attached to 3 others. By evening there was a warrant. I stood on the corner watching the building where the meeting had happened weeks earlier. Same marble steps, same brass handles, different energy. Fear has a smell. Once you know it, you can find it anywhere. Marcus joined me, hands in his coat pockets. You sure about this? No, I said, but I'm done pretending safety comes from silence. Across the street, the door opened. The older man, the one who'd offered me compromise, stepped out. His posture was the same. His eyes weren't. He saw me. Understood, he nodded once, not respect, recognition, the kind you give an equal threat. He got into his carriage and rolled away without a word. I watched until it disappeared, because I knew what came next. When men like that stop negotiating, they stop warning. And somewhere right then a decision had been made. Not to scare me, not to buy me, to remove me, cleanly, quietly, with no witnesses. I turned away, already planning. Because the difference between being hunted and being finished is simple. The hunted still gets to move, and I wasn't done moving yet. You can feel it when the hunt shifts. The air tightens. Streets you've walked 100 times start looking unfamiliar, not dangerous, prepared. Like a stage reset between acts. I didn't go home that night. That's rule 1 when removal gets authorized. Home is predictable. Predictable gets people killed. I walked, slow, purposeful, letting the city show me what it wanted me to see. 2 blocks in, I spotted the first tell. A man pretending to wait for a carriage that wasn't coming. Shoes too clean, eyes too alert. I passed him without a glance. 3 streets later, a second, younger, nervous. Hands never left his coat. That told me everything. They weren't improvising. They were coordinating. I ducked into a public hall where voices echoed and faces blurred. Sat down. Watched reflections in glass instead of people directly. Let the net close a little more. Nets reveal their shape when they tighten. That's when I saw the mistake. They thought this was about me. They always do. I slipped out through a side door and headed somewhere I hadn't been in months. Somewhere nobody watching my habits would expect. The old counting office, not the front, the back, same door. Same confidence that no one would be stupid enough to return there once pressure started. Confidence is expensive. Inside, the place smelled like dust and ink and arrogance. I didn't turn on a light. I didn't need to. I went straight to the cabinet. The one Keller never mentioned. Inside were duplicates. Copies men forgot they made because they trusted their own importance too much. Names connected to dates, dates connected to payments, payments connected to decisions. Enough. I took only what I could carry in my head. Then I left something behind. Not a note. A signal. When I stepped back into the street, the city felt different. Less patient, like it knew something had been moved. I didn't see the men again that night, which meant they were waiting. The next morning, Daniel found me before sunrise. "They're saying you disappeared," he whispered. "Good," I said. "Let them believe it." By noon, the rumor had spread. James was gone, ran, hiding, finished. Power relaxes when it thinks it's won. That afternoon, a carriage stopped in front of the newspaper office. And for the first time since Charleston, someone else started asking questions out loud. Not because they cared, because the answers were suddenly worth money. I stood across the street, hat low, watching the door. Because when hunters think the prey is dead, they stop checking their blind spots. And the next sound they'd hear wouldn't be footsteps behind them. It would be their own name. Spoken in daylight. By someone who wasn't afraid to repeat it. And once that happens, there's no putting the story back in the cage. The paper hit the street before the men hit the brakes. Not a headline, not yet. A question, printed clean, careful. Just enough detail to make the right people choke on their breakfast and the wrong people start calling lawyers before noon. I watched from across the way as the editor paced, cigarette burning down between his fingers, rereading the same paragraph like it might change if he stared hard enough. It wouldn't. Because once ink touches paper in daylight, it stops being a rumor. It becomes a problem. By afternoon, the city shifted again. Carriages doubled back. Messengers ran instead of walked. Doors that used to stay open suddenly didn't. Power was scrambling. Daniel found me near the river, eyes bright, voice low. "They're panicking," he said. "Names are being denied by people who used to answer proudly." "Good," I said. "That means the story's bigger than me now." That's when the warning came. Not spoken, not written. A body. A man floated up near the docks just before dusk, middle-aged, well-dressed. Someone important enough that people recognized him, but not important enough to be protected all the way to the end. A message laid out where everyone could see it. I didn't need to ask who he was. I knew the type. A link in the chain. One of the tolerable ones. Marcus stood beside me as the crowd gathered at a distance. "They're reminding you," he said. "Yes," I replied, "and rushing." Rushing means fear. Fear means mistakes. But fear also means escalation. That night a note was slid under the door of the place I was hiding. No name, no seal, just 4 words written like an order. "This ends tomorrow night." No time, no place, which meant they wanted me guessing. I folded the note and burned it over the sink, watching the last letter curl into nothing. Tomorrow night meant one thing. They were done reacting. They were going to make an example. I sat in the dark afterward, listening to the city breathe, counting the distance between footsteps, weighing every move left on the board. Because when power decides to end something, it doesn't care about fairness. It cares about silence. And tomorrow night, someone was going to try to buy it with blood. The only question left was whose. I didn't wait for tomorrow night. That's how you lose. When someone tells you the clock is running, what they're really saying is they think you're standing still. I never gave them that comfort. By morning, I'd already chosen the ground. Not a back alley, not a warehouse. Not anywhere shadows could be blamed for what happened. I chose a place men like them couldn't control once eyes turned. A public hall near the river. Meetings there, sermons, lectures. The kind of building where people came expecting words, not blood. I sent the invitation myself. Not to them, to everyone else. Printers. Clergy, dock leaders. A city councilman who owed a favor he'd never repaid. I didn't explain everything. I didn't need to. All I wrote was, "If you want the truth before it's buried again, come tonight." By dusk, the room was half full. By nightfall, it was packed. That's when they arrived, not all at once, not loud. They slipped in, scanning exits, counting bodies, realizing too late that this wasn't a place you could clean quietly. I stood at the front when the murmuring died. "I didn't ask you here to make speeches," I said. "I asked you here because silence has been expensive." Faces tightened. Pens came out, people leaned forward. I started with Charleston, not poetry, not rage, just facts. Ledgers, schedules, names, dates. The machinery of it. How human beings got turned into numbers without ever being called dead. I watched the room change, discomfort first, then anger, then something harder, recognition. Halfway through I saw them, the men who'd threatened me, scattered, pale, no longer certain who held the advantage. One of them stood. "This is a lie," he said, too loud. "A fabrication by a disgruntled." "Sit down," a woman near the front said coldly. He didn't. That was his mistake. Others started speaking. Not me, them, dockworkers, clergy. A printer holding up a proof sheet with shaking hands. Connections formed in real time, you could feel it. The moment the story stopped belonging to one man and became something bigger, I stepped back. Let it happen. That's when I heard it, a click. Not from the front. From the side door. I turned just as a man reached into his coat. Marcus moved first. So did three others I hadn't expected. Hands grabbed, shouts erupted, chairs scraped, someone screamed. The man went down hard, weapons skidding across the floor. Uniforms surged in moments later. Real ones. Called in by someone smarter than the people who thought tonight would end clean. They dragged him away. Dragged the rest too. The hall buzzed like a hive hit with smoke. I stood there, breathing steady, heart slow. Because I knew what had just happened. They'd tried to end it quietly. Instead, they'd ended it publicly. I looked out at the crowd, at the faces that would repeat this story whether anyone wanted them to or not. "This doesn't make me safe," I said. "It makes me necessary." No one argued. As people filed out, Daniel came to my side. "It's over," he said, almost hopeful. I shook my head. "No," I replied, "it's exposed." Outside, the night air felt different. Lighter. Dangerous in a new way. Somewhere, someone was already planning how to survive what came next, and I knew. When the dust settles, power always looks for a replacement. The only question now was whether it would be me, or whether I'd already learned enough to make sure it never sat that close to the throne again. Exposure doesn't end wars. It just changes the weapons. By morning, the city had chosen sides without saying so out loud. Papers ran pieces that danced around names but pointed hard enough to bruise. Churches spoke carefully. Dock bosses stopped returning certain calls. And men who'd once walked heavy suddenly traveled light. I stayed visible. That was the last thing they expected. I walked the same streets, sat in the same places. Let people see I wasn't hiding, wasn't running, wasn't begging protection from anyone with a badge or a title. Because the truth about power is this. Once it's embarrassed, it doesn't strike immediately. It waits for applause to fade. Daniel noticed it too. "They're being polite," he said one afternoon. "That scares me." "It should," I replied. "Polite means regrouping." 3 days later, a messenger found me. Young, nervous, too clean to be poor, too scared to be confident. "Someone wants to speak with you," he said, privately. "No," I answered. He swallowed. "He said you'd say that." "Then why are you still here?" He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Because he also said to tell you, the Hartwell name isn't the one you should have been watching." That landed hard. "Who then?" I asked. The boy shook his head. "I don't know, I swear." He ran before I could stop him. That night I sat alone with the list again. The names I knew, the names that had surfaced, the names that never did, patterns I'd missed, connections that didn't make sense unless Hartwell was never the center, unless they were just the face. I felt it then, the cold certainty. We'd deshaken a branch, but the tree was still standing, and trees don't fall quietly. Somewhere beyond the people I'd confronted, beyond the men I'd exposed, there was another layer. Older. Quieter. patient enough to let others burn while it stayed in the shade. That kind of power doesn't threaten, it replaces. I folded the list slowly, mind already moving ahead, because the next enemy wouldn't come angry, wouldn't come loud, wouldn't come sloppy, they'd come smiling. And when they finally reached out, it wouldn't be to silence me, it would be to offer me a seat. And that offer, that was going to be the most dangerous moment of all. The invitation arrived without ink. No note, no messenger, no address, just a change. One morning, doors that used to stay closed opened. A clerk who wouldn't meet my eyes last week nodded like we'd always been acquainted. A council aide asked if I'd considered formalizing my concerns. That's how the real ones do it. They don't threaten, they normalize. Daniel caught it before I said anything. They're trying to move you inside. Yes, I said. That's how they end stories, they turn them into meetings. That afternoon I was escorted, not invited, to a building I'd passed 100 times and never noticed. No sign, no guards out front, respectability doesn't announce itself. Inside, the room was quiet in a way only expensive places are. Thick carpet, heavy chairs, air that didn't echo. The man waiting was older than the rest, not fragile, finished. You've caused disruption, he said gently, and progress. I didn't sit. You exposed a symptom, he continued, but symptoms aren't diseases, they're opportunities. For who? I asked. For people who know how to manage outcomes, he replied, people like you. There it was, the seat. We don't erase what you've done, he said. We redirect it, oversight committees, advisory roles, controlled transparency. Control, I said. He smiled. Stability. He slid a folder across the table, not toward me, near me, like he wasn't sure yet. Protection, he said. Resources, influence, the ability to make sure what happened doesn't happen again. And the cost? He looked at me for the first time like the answer mattered. Restraint, he said. You don't burn the house down, you help us renovate. I thought of Charleston, of ledgers, of men broken quietly and forgotten efficiently. I finally sat. Let me ask you something, I said. How many people have sat where you're sitting now believing the same thing? He didn't answer. That was answer enough. I stood again. You don't want reform, I said calmly. You want continuity with better lighting. His smile thinned. You'll regret walking away, he said. No, I replied. I'd regret staying. As I left, I understood the real danger wasn't the threat. It was the offer, because the hardest thing for a man who survived cages is refusing a room with no bars. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside that building, power recalculated, and I knew what came next wouldn't be a hit. It would be a replacement, someone cleaner, quieter, easier to manage. And when they put that man forward, they'd need me gone, not dead. Irrelevant, which is worse, and the clock had started again. Irrelevant is a slow death, no blood, no noise. Just fewer doors opening, fewer names returned, fewer places where your presence matters. Power prefers it that way. Quiet endings don't leave stains. I felt it working almost immediately. Invitations stopped. Editors grew cautious. Men who used to lean in now leaned back like proximity itself had become risky. They weren't hostile, they were instructed. Daniel noticed first. They're shrinking your shadow, he said. Yes, I replied, which means they're afraid of what's still in it. That night I made myself smaller on purpose, skipped the meetings, changed routines. Let the city believe the story had peaked and moved on. Let them think I was tired. That's when the replacement appeared. Young, educated, clean record, well-spoken. He talked about reform without ever naming victims, about progress without ever touching cause. Papers loved him, committees applauded. He was safe, and he was dangerous, because men like him don't deny history, they sanitize it. I watched him speak one afternoon, standing at the edge of a crowd that didn't know it was being managed. He smiled the right amount, paused in the right places, promised oversight, balance, forward movement. Never once mentioned Charleston, never once said Hartwell. That told me everything. After the speech, someone brushed past me and slipped a folded paper into my hand. No eye contact, no pause, just 4 words written in a careful hand. They're closing in. I didn't need to ask who. That night I opened the floorboard and took out the last thing I'd been saving. Not names, not dates, a pattern. A map of how influence moved when it thought no one was watching, who replaced who paid for silence when exposure failed. It wasn't enough to shout it, it had to be undeniable, and it had to come from somewhere they couldn't touch without revealing themselves. I looked at the paper until dawn. Then I smiled, because I finally understood the move they never saw coming. They thought the danger was my voice. It was. It was where I was about to place it, and once it landed, no one would be able to pretend they didn't hear it, not anymore. But before that happened, there was one last thing I had to do: disappear. Not as a victim, as a ghost, because ghosts don't ask permission. They haunt. And the house that thought it had renovated itself was about to learn what it forgot to tear out. I vanished the right way. No drama, no sudden absence, just a gradual thinning like smoke you don't notice leaving until the room feels colder. I stopped showing up where I was expected. Let the replacement take the stage. Let the applause find him instead of me. That's how you survive long enough to strike again. From a distance I watched him work. The speeches, the committees, the promises wrapped in clean language. He was careful not to lie outright. He didn't have to. Omission is cheaper. Meanwhile, I moved through places power never bothers to renovate. Basements, back rooms, kitchens after hours. The edges where people talk when they're done being afraid of sounding important. That's where the pattern filled in. Money didn't stop moving. It just learned new routes, new charities, new boards, same beneficiaries, same quiet understanding that some things were too useful to dismantle. I wrote nothing down. I didn't have to anymore. The map lived in my head now, complete. That's when I sent it, not to a paper, not to a politician, not even to a preacher, to a group that hated inefficiency more than injustice. Insurance men, auditors, accountants who lived for discrepancies and smelled blood in ledgers the way sharks smell water. They didn't care about Charleston. They cared about numbers that didn't add up, and the numbers didn't add up. 3 weeks later, the replacement stopped smiling. A month later, committees froze, funds stalled, accounts were flagged, not accused, examined. That's worse, because examination spreads. Questions get copied, files multiply. By the time anyone realized where it started, it was too late to trace it back. That's the beauty of systems. They eat their own when fed correctly. Daniel found me one night in a borrowed room above a closed shop. "It's collapsing," he said, quietly. "Good," I replied. "Quiet means no martyrs." "And you?" "I'm done being visible." Outside, sirens wailed, not for us, not anymore. Somewhere downtown, a man was discovering his signature on a document he didn't remember approving. Somewhere else, a board member was learning that loyalty doesn't cover arithmetic. I stood by the window and watched the city breathe, because I knew something then that I hadn't known before. I didn't need a seat at the table. I didn't need to burn the house down. All I had to do was learn how it was built and loosen the right beams. They'd rebuild, of course, they always do. But next time they'd build quieter, smaller, more careful, and that meant fewer cages, fewer ledgers, fewer men disappearing without names. That's the real win. Not justice, not peace, just less room for monsters to hide. I stepped back into the shadows, content to let the story end without me in it. Because the most dangerous man in any city is the one who knows how the game works and chooses when to stop playing. Years later, the city forgot the noise. That's what cities do best. Names faded. Scandals softened into footnotes. Buildings changed hands. New men learned old habits and convinced themselves they were different because the language sounded cleaner. Some things stayed altered. The shipping office by the river never reopened. The charity that moved money like fog dissolved under audits nobody claimed credit for. A handful of respectable men retired early and avoided eye contact for the rest of their lives. No statues came down. No speeches were made, which was fine. I didn't need monuments. I needed outcomes. Daniel left the city first. West, new name, new work. He wrote once, years later, one line only: "I sleep now." That was enough. Marcus stayed, married, Opened a small business that kept its books clean and its doors open late for people who needed somewhere safe to sit. He never talked about the past. He didn't have to. You could see it in how he watched rooms. Isaiah disappeared the right way. No trail, no explanation. Some men earn that ending. Sarah wrote once a year, always short, always careful. Rose learned fast, then faster. She asked questions that made teachers pause. She grew into someone who didn't lower her eyes for anyone. As for me, I became hard to find. Not because I was hiding, because I no longer needed to be visible to matter. Sometimes, when the city quieted enough, I'd walk past places where deals were made and watch the doors. Not to interfere, just to remember. Just to make sure the balance hadn't tipped too far back. People like to believe evil needs passion. It doesn't. It needs permission. And permission is easier to revoke than people think, if you understand who grants it. I kept no list anymore. No names, no dates. The work had moved into other hands, other minds. That's how it was supposed to be. Power rots fastest when it believes it's irreplaceable. One evening, standing at a corner I used to avoid, I caught my reflection in a darkened window. Older, quieter, still standing. I smiled, not because I'd won, but because I'd learned something most men never do. Survival isn't submission, and resistance doesn't always look like fire. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like walking away at the exact moment they expect you to stay. And sometimes it looks like a man who knows the whole board, choosing not to sit at it ever again.